Okay, so yesterday we have discussed water and ecosystem interaction, then soil plant water system, and one of the things that we mentioned was, in addition to the solar energy and water, plant do require nutrients, right? Now, where do they get the nutrients from? Soil. Roots absorb these nutrients from the soil, from the water, and they use it for various purposes. And we also had some discussion what will happen if there is a nutrient reduction or if there is a water reduction, right? So let's see some of that. So we are talking mostly on the nutrient cycling, which has two components. So this is a two-part lecture. One which focuses on the soil, nutrient cycling in the soil, and the second one is the aquatic system. So I'm going to focus on the soil part, and Professor Chaube is going to focus on the aquatic ecosystem, how the nutrient transport does happen in the aquatic ecosystem. Okay. So, well, at the end, this is a lecture outcomes for both the lectures that completes the nutrient cycling. So, at the end of this lecture, you will be able to understand nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon cycle in the terrestrial ecosystems. When I say terrestrial ecosystems, it's mostly in the soil. Then you can describe nutrient spiraling concept, understand biotic and abiotic controls of nutrient transport in streams, explain how nutrient uptake length can be used as an indicator to assess stream health, and understand how nutrient dynamics can be simulated in SWAT model, right? So all this nutrient cycling must be simulated within the model for having a good predictions on nutrient dynamics. When we say that the nitrate or phosphate content in the stream is going to be so and so, it has to be simulated, and that is where the integration with hydrological cycle comes into picture. What is the flow? What is the nutrient transport to the sediment, to the soil erosion, and what will be the concentration at certain point in your stream. Okay, now coming back to the original point, your plant requires some nutrients in it. It requires light, it requires carbon dioxide, it requires water, soil structure for the root growth, but in addition it requires nutrients, right? And they are required for plant growth and development. Many of their proteins, enzymes, all are require some of these nutrients. Similar to us, we do require nutrients, yes? Yes or no? So similarly, your plant requires nutrients. Those nutrients are broadly classified into macronutrients and micronutrients, depending upon the quantity they require. Some nutrients are required in larger quantities as compared to others. Okay? So they are broadly divided into macro and micronutrients, but all the nutrients are usually taken up from the roots, right? The plant absorbs the nutrients from the soil water through roots via root hairs, which take up minerals in the dissolved soil water. So in addition, for the water, these dissolved minerals are uptaken or absorbed by the plant roots, and they are given to the plant through its vascular system. So coming to the different nutrients part, macronutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur, whereas micronutrients are iron, manganese, zinc, copper, boron, so on and so forth, right? And there are some basic nutrients which are required, that is your C, H, and O, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, which are required for the plant takes from the air and water, but these macronutrients and micronutrients are usually absorbed from the soil. Now among these macronutrients, nitrogen is something that is required in larger quantities as compared to any other nutrient. Nitrogen is the largest nutrient that is required by the plant, followed by potassium, and then followed by other nutrients, and phosphorus being among them. Why are they required? If you see, nitrogen supports protein synthesis, right? So your protein development, protein synthesis, enzymes, development of amino acids, right, require nitrogen. Even in the DNA and RNA of your this thing, it requires, the nitrogen is required. So nitrogen's job is mostly in the protein synthesis. Phosphorus is required in energy transfer. Whatever the energy that is getting generated in photosynthesis, the storage of that energy, or phosphorus helps in storage of, to develop some compounds where that energy is stored, which can be used at a later point. You have potassium that regulates the water balance, calcium which strengthens the cell walls, Magnesium is vital for chlorophyll and sulfur forms the protein, right. So, even the nitrogen also helps in the chlorophyll and formation of proteins, right. But in general, your nitrogen is the major requirement for the crop, followed by potassium and then followed by phosphorus. Now, your micronutrients such as iron, zinc and manganese assist in enzyme functions. Your enzymes, your microenzymes that are there, the functioning of the plant, right. So, your plant physiologist or crop physiologist will be able to, they do a lot of work on this, on how different nutrients affect the plant growth or the crop growth, right. So, the ratio of macronutrients, although I am saying that in general nitrogen is the most required nutrient, the ratio between different nutrients depends upon the plant varieties and also depends upon the growing conditions. Where are they growing? Depends on the soil conditions, depends upon the atmospheric conditions, and also, but primarily depends upon the what kind of species it is, what kind of plant it is. Different plants require nutrients in a different level. Okay. So, let us see the nitrate. So, when we say in the nutrient cycle, before we go into the nitrogen and phosphorus, because they are the key elements which affect the water quality. Okay, we will talk to them why they affect the water quality. But nutrient cycling is basically transfer and recycling of key nutrients. In our case, we are focusing on nitrogen, phosphorus in terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. In the terrestrial cycle on the land, plant absorbs the nutrients, animals consume them, and decomposition of plant and animals returns the nutrients to the soil. That is the entire cycle. Plants take it from the environment, from the soil and the atmosphere, animals consume them, and then when both of them die, the nutrients comes back into the soil or the atmosphere again. In the aquatic cycle, nutrients from the land surface enter via runoff or deposition to the sediment deposition and are recycled by aquatic plants, animals and microbes. Now, both these systems, both your terrestrial system as well as the aquatic system are interlinked. Your sediment transport along with it transfers the nutrients which are consumed by the aquatic ecosystem, and some of it comes back into atmosphere in a certain way, right. So, the both are interlinked. So, any disruption in one of the system is going to cause disruption in another system, right. Sudden increase in your sediment load, sudden increase in your nutrient load is going to cause eutrophication or soil degradation. Okay. So, since these systems are interlinked, your hydrology and this nutrient cycling are interlinked by the transport processes that are involved in your hydrological cycle. Okay. All the transport processes such as runoff, precipitation, high intensity precipitation is going to cause more soil erosion, right, which helps in the transport process. Okay, coming to the nitrogen cycle, we have a figure here. You have plants. Now, some of the plants, some of the crops such as your legumes, right, they have a bacteria which can absorb the nitrogen in the atmosphere and directly supply to the plant. And some of the bacteria also helps in adding it to the soil in terms of ammonia. It converts the atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia, which plants can absorb and gets added in the soil. Now, this ammonia gets nitrified to create nitrates, which is also absorbed by the plant. And in this process, a denitrification process may also happen, which converts these nitrates back to atmosphere. In addition to that, when these plants die or animals that consume and die, the nutrients from there, the bacteria will decompose this organic matter and release the nutrients back to the soil, right. So, there are 5 different processes which are essential. One is the nitrogen fixation, the nitrogen getting to soil. So, this is a natural process where the nitrogen from the atmosphere comes into the soil, it gets utilized and comes back to the atmosphere. So, that cycle is a natural process. Now, in this cycle, we are adding fertilizers. We are adding fertilizers in terms of NPK, and that nitrogen must also be included in this. So, there are 5 different processes, main processes that are involved. One is nitrogen fixation, nitrification, assimilation, ammonification and denitrification. Okay. So, these are the 5 processes that are involved in this. Okay. We will see each one of them how it is to be done, right. But then the nitrogen cycle in the soil is a process through which nitrogen moves through various forms, transforming between the chemical states. It transforms into various compounds and being utilized by plants, animals and microorganisms. Okay? So, nitrogen is a reactive element. It exists in various valence states, creating so many compounds. Right? For example, here it exists in these many states: nitrate, nitrogen dioxide, nitrite, nitrogen monoxide. Then you have nitrous oxide, elemental nitrogen or atmospheric nitrogen, right? Hydroxyl amine, hydrazine and ammonium gas. Okay? But in the soil it exists in three forms. One is the organic nitrogen, then the other two are inorganic nitrogen, which is the mineral forms of nitrogen held by soil colloids, and mineral forms of nitrogen in solution. Plants absorb these mineral forms of nitrogen in the solution. They take the nutrients along with the water. Whichever is soluble within the water, they absorb that, right? Now, in addition to that, nitrogen may be added to the soil by fertilizer. As I said, we apply a lot of fertilizers. You have seen a figure that after green revolution, how application of fertilizers has increased the productivity in the first few classes, right? Similarly, in addition to that, the nitrogen fixation by the bacteria, and there is also a deposition from the rain, atmospheric deposition from the rain, and there is a dry deposition. Dry deposition, the atmosphere, it comes, some of the deposition do happen, right? In addition to that, there is something called by the lightning strikes at some particular location, that also helps in adding nitrogen to the soil. From the soil, it is removed either by plant uptake, leaching to the subsurface or groundwater layers, volatilization, denitrification and erosion, right? So, all these processes involve the movement of water. You need water for the plant to uptake it, you need the water for leaching. Denitrification is an anaerobic process. You need the soil to be saturated or the pores to be filled, the absence of air, and the erosion. Erosion is also taken by both wind and water, but water is the dominant source in most of the agricultural landscapes. Okay? Now, as I said, it is highly reactive element and exists in number of valence states, right? So, that is why you have so many compounds, right? And nitrates and the ammonium is the conditions where plants can easily absorb the nitrogen. Those are the states at which plants can easily absorb the nitrogen from the soil or from the through the root system. Okay, let's see the 5 processes that are there. A figure that you will see in your SWAT manual, which is basically the nitrogen cycle. The nitrogen fixation is basically certain bacteria like rhizobium and cyanobacteria can convert atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia. So, this atmospheric nitrogen is get converted into ammonia, a form that plant can use, right? So, you have rhizobium bacteria, cyanobacteria. This is something you would have learnt in your high school. Yes? How many of you remember? High school, right? Sciences. I don't know, 8th class, 9th class. We learn much of this in our high school. Water cycle, right? It's although we are covering it at a PG and UG levels, but some basic introduction is given to us in our high school. So, similarly, this rhizobium bacteria, nitrogen fixing, it fixes in the soil, and this happens in the root nodules of a legumes or in the soil, right? Wherever the root nodules are there, it will have fixation. In addition to that, it also fixes by lightning or industrial processes, converting nitrogen into nitrates. It can directly convert into nitrogen into nitrates. So, there is a process due to lightning strike or some industrial processes, it can also convert nitrogen to nitrates. So, how much of our atmosphere consists of nitrogen? 71%? Not sure? 78%. Yes. Okay, that's good. So, once the nitrogen gets fixed, this nitrogen compounds, different chemical reactions takes place to form nitrification. Nitrification is basically they convert this ammonia to nitrates. Plants can absorb the ammonia, but in addition to compared to ammonia, they are able to absorb nitrates much faster, in a much faster scale. So, the process where soil bacteria convert ammonia into nitrates, which are more readily available or absorbed by the plants. So it happens in two ways. First, ammonia is first converted into nitrates by a bacteria, Nitrosomonas. These nitrites are then converted to nitrates. So it goes from NH3 to NO2 minus, and then it goes to NO3 minus, right, which is what we call as nitrobacter. Now in this process, some volatilization, that is basically your ammonia which is there in the soil becomes into gaseous form, and some of it is lost. That is your NH3, ammonia volatilization, some of it is lost to atmosphere, right. So in the soil, your nitrification is generally a function of soil temperature and soil water content. What is the water content available? What is the soil temperature? All these conditions control the rate of your reaction, right. I am not showing any chemical reactions here. I am just putting it in a more qualitative terms, right. But there are chemical reactions, and which will have, from our basic chemistry, we do understand that temperature is one of the factors for chemical reaction, rate of reaction. Yes? Remember? No? Okay. So similarly, your soil temperature and soil water content, both of them are affect the quantity, both of them affect in this nitrification process, right. So basically your ammonia gets converted into nitrates. That's a two-step process. It first gets converted into nitrites, then to nitrates. So once it gets converted to nitrates, assimilation. Plant absorbs these nitrates and ammonia from the soil through the roots to synthesize amino acids and proteins which are essential for their growth. Okay. So the plants absorb these from the soil, both ammonium as well as the nitrates from the soil, which are essential, right. Now animals consume these plants. Animals and humans consume these plants or other animals to have this nitrogen, to obtain the nitrogen. That part is the assimilation in our ecosystem, right. From the atmospheric system, it has now come into the soil. From the soil, it has come to the plant, and plant to other living beings. Okay. There is another process which is when this plant dies. When your plant or animal or any organism die, what we know as ammonification or mineralization. So here, when the plant or animal dies, this bacteria breaks down this organic matter into glucose and use that glucose for energy. That process is what we call as ammonification. The bacteria decomposes the organic material, this all of us know, right. To obtain energy for its growth processes, it basically decomposes into glucose and takes the energy from there. And in this process of breaking down the organic material into a glucose or energy, it requires a nitrogen. Now this it usually obtains from the organic matter itself. So this nitrogen, whatever it is trying to utilize to break this organic material into carbohydrates or glucose, it takes that nitrogen from the organic material itself. Now let's say that organic matter that it has is lacking in nitrogen. So the bacteria will start utilizing the nitrogen sources from the soil. It will take that additional nitrogen requirement from the soil itself. But if the nitrogen in your organic material is at a higher quantity than it is required, then it will release. It will release that nitrogen in the form of ammonia and ammonium, which can then be reused in the soil. So many of the plants and many of the animals, when they die, the bacteria gives back that nitrogen to the soil. But then if it has a lacking of nitrogen, it will utilize the nitrogen from its surrounding sources. That process is what we call as ammonification. Denitrification is if in this particular process your soil is saturated. When the soil is saturated, that means all the air in your pores does not exist. It's all the pores are filled with water, and that is what creates an anaerobic condition. So in anaerobic condition, your reactions will work in a different way. So in that condition, certain bacteria convert nitrates back into nitrogen gas. That process is what we call as denitrification, right? Which is released back into atmosphere, completing the nitrogen cycle. So denitrification is a function of water content. What is the water content in your soil profile? Temperature, presence of a carbon source, and nitrates, right? So all these are represent it in a very qualitative way, but similar to what I said, all modeling we have to represent it in terms of mathematical equations. So many researchers have developed these processes in a mathematical form, which is incorporated in the model. So all these processes are simulated in your SWAT, right? Even the bacteria, even how the transformation of nitrates to nitrites. And as we have discussed yesterday, the initialization in the soil, it all comes down to what is the initial nitrogen content in the soil. That initialization is, you have a database to do that, but if you're interested in this particular process, you must go back and look whether those initial values make sense. Okay? So coming to the modeling of nitrogen cycle in the SWAT, you have a mineral nitrogen and you have two components. It's basically divided into 5 pools. One is the mineral nitrogen and another one is the organic nitrogen. So this is the organic nitrogen, which is fresh from the organic matter or humus, plant residue. Some of it is in the stable form, some of it is in the active form. The organic nitrogen fertilizer gets added here. Then in the mineral nitrogen, this ammonium and nitrates, some of it is taken as plant uptake, some of the inorganic nitrogen fertilizer, denitrification. Then in ammonium, nitrification goes to plant uptake. Some of it gets lost in the gaseous phase, and then application of ammonia for the fertilizer. So this is the entire process which gets simulated, right? It basically breaks it down into 5 pools, and in each of the pool it will maintain levels, or it will have an interaction between each of the pool, right? And finally, depending upon the plant, there is always a ideal uptake, what is the maximum uptake it can take, and actual uptake. And that actual uptake again depends upon the plant condition, plant growth stage, as well as what is the soil water that is available to you. Okay? And SWAT also simulates the atmospheric deposition of nitrogen. It simulates how much nitrogen is getting deposited from the rain, or how much deposition is happening through a dry deposition, okay, from the atmosphere directly onto the soil or to the plant. Okay, all of them have a mathematical equation to do that. Now coming to the next component, phosphorus cycle. Now nitrogen is the one which is the most required nutrient, and it is followed by potassium. But potassium does not create too much of a problem. Potassium is easily absorbed by the plant. Although the quantity of potassium that is needed by the plant is much higher compared to phosphorus, it is easily absorbed by the plant, thus not having much impact on the environmental water quality. But on the other hand, phosphorus, though it is required in smaller quantities, it will have a certain effect, or it will has a large effect in water quality, right? That is because phosphorus is not really soluble with water. Okay, it's not very soluble in water, and that allows it for the water to get to transport. So plants can absorb these nutrients or minerals when they get soluble in water. Okay, so demand for plant phosphorus is considerably less than nitrogen demand. However, it is required for many essential functions, right? So one of the main essential function of phosphorus is to develop compounds, or help develop compounds which store energy and transfer it, right? So the energy obtained in photosynthesis and metabolism of carbohydrates is stored in phosphorus compounds for later use. So plant store this photosynthesis, or the energy that is generated, or right, in these phosphorus compounds, and use it at a later stage. That is where the phosphorus is very important. So this is the phosphorus cycle. We get phosphorus primarily from the rocks, right, which comes in the form of fertilizers. Some of it goes in runoff in streams, which goes into the water. Some of it gets dissolved, some of it gets uptaken by the plants, consumed by the aquatic ecosystem, consumed by the animals, and then it's similar to very similar to a nitrogen cycle, right? It is taken from the rocks, it comes back, and then it is released back to the environment or the atmosphere. So the phosphorus cycle is a vital process that facilitates the movement of phosphorus through the soil, plants, animals, and decomposers. It starts with a weathered rocks that release phosphate ions, PO4 3-. So it's the phosphate ion that gets released by the weathering of certain rocks. Plant absorbs phosphorus, which is passed through food chain to herbivores and carnivores, and then finally decomposes bacteria, return this phosphorus to soil. So excess phosphorus can run off into water bodies, causing eutrophication. So it comes back. Fresh water, what is the limiting factor? Phosphorus or nitrogen? Phosphorus. What about in the salt water? Nitrogen, right? So this phosphorus, even though it is of very less quantity, it causes eutrophication in your freshwater resources. Okay? So coming to the phosphorus cycle, again in the soil it exists in three forms: organic phosphorus, that is associated with the organic matter humus, insoluble forms of mineral phosphorus, and plant available form of phosphorus in soil solution. Okay? So plant extract this part, the third component, the plant available form of phosphorus in soil condition, right? Remaining ones are there. Now in addition to that, phosphorus can be added in the form of manures, fertilizers, or residue application, right? Organic matter. Phosphorus is removed by either plant uptake or erosion, right? Compared to nitrogen, the uptake has only two processes. Either the plant takes it or it gets lost to the erosion, soil erosion, because it gets attached to the soil particles. Now why it gets attached is, it's not readily soluble. Nitrogen is soluble in water, but the phosphorus is not readily soluble. And any chemical reaction that comes out of a solution, your phosphorus generally precipitates out. Once it precipitates out, it comes onto the surface for the transport and surface runoff. So it gets attached to those soil particles, or it gets attached to the soil colloids, which gets transported during the erosion, right? And that is what happens, and that's what creates a problem in the freshwater bodies. So your phosphorus cycle in soil, it starts with weathering. To brief up, it starts with weathering. So your phosphorus from your rocks in terms of phosphate through the weathering. Now this phosphate ion goes into a soluble phosphate ions, which forms this compound H2PO4- and HPO4-2-, right? And this compound is what the plants can absorb. Plants take up this particular compound from the soil. So this phosphate ion, which gets released to the weathering, have some chemical transformations when it gets, some part of it gets interacted with the water, forming a new compound which is taken up by the soil, by the plant. Now decomposition, organic matter from dead plants and animals, whatever phosphate is being absorbed, it comes back releasing the organic phosphorus into the soil. Then you have mineralization. Soil microbes convert organic phosphorus into inorganic phosphate, making it available for plants. So some part of this organic phosphorus gets converted into inorganic phosphate ions, making it available for plants. And then there is also immobilization. Inorganic phosphate can be fixed in the soil particles or converted into insoluble forms, reducing its availability. So these bacteria, sometimes they also create insoluble forms, reducing in availability. And finally, leaching and erosion. Phosphorus can be lost through surface runoff or erosion, entering water bodies and causing eutrophication, right? So in addition to the plant taking up some part of it, this also, some of it is lost, okay? Again, the modeling of phosphorus, all these components are modeled within the SWAT, not going into the chemical reactions, not going into the basic chemistry of it, but it can be taken up in 6 different pools. It has organic phosphorus, it has mineral phosphorus. Within mineral phosphorus, the plant can uptake from the solution, and inorganic phosphorus fertilizer gets added in the form of solution which moves between active and stable. Similarly, organic phosphorus that comes from the humus, organic material, as well as organic phosphorus fertilizers, which moves from stable to active pools, and some of these active pools get transferred into solution and residue mineralization, which takes by the plant uptake, right? So all these processes, the SWAT model simulates the phosphorus transport in surface runoff in 2 main forms. One is the soluble water or the soluble phosphorus also get transported, and as well as phosphorus attached to the sediment. So the eutrophication, it's not only the sediment particles, it's also some part of the soluble phosphorus get also transferred, right? as I said, it simulates the movement of phosphorus through these 6 pools, right? A simplified representation of that. Then finally, coming to the nutrient cycling, one of the cycle that we all know is the carbon cycle. Carbon cycle is where plants absorb this carbon dioxide during photosynthesis, right? It converts this carbon dioxide into glucose and energy, and then carbon moves through the food chain as herbivores and carnivores consume plants and animals with CO2 release during respiration. Okay, and decomposes return. So it's mostly you have the radiation, photosynthesis, plant respiration. In the plant respiration, some of the carbon dioxide is released. Now, this carbon dioxide is used for developing glucose, but when we consume it, when we die, some of the carbon gets reduced, and some of the human activities such as fossil fuels and deforestation disrupt the carbon cycle, contributing to climate change as such. Okay. So with this, the terrestrial part is kind of done. So to summarize, plant require the nutrients, right? Plant require the nutrients, and they absorb these nutrients from the soil. And among these nutrients, depending upon the quantity that is required, you will have macronutrients and micronutrients. Macro you require in higher quantities, and among the macronutrients, nitrogen is the most required nutrient as such, followed by potassium, followed by phosphorus, and two of these macronutrients, that is nitrogen and phosphorus, have a significant effect on water quality. So SWAT is able to simulate these nitrogen pools, the movement of this nitrogen cycle through 5 pools. It conceptually represented the entire cycle into 5 pools, followed by it also transports into water bodies, the transportation process. Coming to the phosphorus, the SWAT modeled, or SWAT, it is conceptualized the phosphorus cycle into 6 pools, 6 phosphorus pools, 3 inorganic and 3 organic, and processes like mineralization, decomposition, and immobilization happen, right? So SWAT has this quality model which simulates the water quality, which simulates many of the processes which Professor Chaube is going to talk in the next lecture, right? But from the terrestrial part of it, it has a simulation module which comes in, right? And that is where we say that it's a comprehensive model. It's not only the rainfall runoff model. It integrates this nutrient cycle with the rainfall runoff, because both are integrated. The movement of water affects the movement of nutrients. Okay, so questions.